Greetings, everyone, from all of us with AARP Idaho. I'm Gypsy Hall, volunteer co-facilitator, along with Janice Ritberg, and joined by Elisa Lettner, our volunteer host.
I've seen them aired.
And Sheena Smith. We invite you to say hello in the chat and post where you're from as you're joining us.
Well, we have people from just about everywhere. Philadelphia, of course, here in Idaho. Where else?
Columbus, Ohio,
Yes. Oh my goodness. Awesome.
Michigan, Florida, Dallas, Texas,
Nice.
Atlanta, Georgia, Nampa, Idaho, Des Moines, Iowa. That's wonderful. Well, welcome and good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone here as you're joining across the country. And welcome to Beyond Camelot, the life and legacy of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, brought to you by AARP Idaho and New Knowledge Adventures. New Knowledge Adventures, or NKA, is composed of a group of volunteers who like to share their passion for lifelong learning with others. Please note that during today's presentation, microphones will be muted, but we encourage you to write any questions in the chat, and our presenter will answer those at the end of the presentation. Today's presenter is Stephanie Bonek, Director of Education and Curatorial Services at the National First Ladies Library and Museum in Canton, Ohio. Please join us in welcoming Stephanie Bonek.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me join you today. This is my second program now with AARP, and I am just so thrilled that Gypsy called me one day and said, hey, can you do a program for AARP Idaho? And I'm like, sure. So I'm really happy that you're joining me this afternoon. I am based out of Canton, Ohio. That is the host site for the National First Ladies Library and Museum. I'm going to share my screen here in a second, but I am enjoying seeing where you all are joining us from, and I hope you'll pardon my appearance. I'm sharing with the panelists here that unfortunately our AC has broken in the building and I'm on the 4th floor, so it's quite warm. Otherwise, I would be wearing my blazer. So I'm going to be sharing my screen here in a second, and we'll get started. So today I'll be presenting about Camelot, the life and legacy of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Just a bit more about what we do at the National First Ladies Library Museum at the First Ladies National Historic Site. For those of you that are close to us in Northeast Ohio, we're right in your backyard, but for some of you, it might be a bit more of a trek out here. The National First Ladies Library Museum, the First Ladies National Historic Site, is the only kind in the world. There is no other museum dedicated to our nation's First Ladies. And we do talk about every First Lady and every White House hostess that steps into the role of being First Lady. We were first founded in 1995 by Mary Regula, the wife of Congressman Ralph Regula. And in 2000, this site was designated as the 380th unit of the National Park Service under former President Bill Clinton. Today, the nonprofit which I work for operates as a 501c3 nonprofit in partnership with the National Park Service, so we operate within that infrastructure. Our site includes the historic Saxton McKinley House, childhood and ancestral home to our very own First Lady Ida McKinley, as well as we have our visitor center, which hosts our research library, archives, theaters, and our exhibit space. So we're very fortunate to have the campus that we do. A bit more about our exhibits. I'm so pleased that I'm joining you this afternoon/morning, depending on where you're coming from, because last Monday we just opened our brand new exhibit, the Eras exhibit, 250 Years of First Ladies' Progress and Power. This is our celebration of America 250, and it will run for the whole celebration of America 250, ending in the spring of 2027. If you do stop by this summer, please feel free to bring your National Parks passport. You can get that stamped at our site. And I hope that you do get a chance in the next year or so to join us for the Eras exhibit, in which we talk about every era in American history, every First Lady, and then especially what women, including our First Ladies, are doing to push the boundaries in American society. Now, without further ado, I really want to get to the meat of our program because I'm sure many of you are Jacqueline Kennedy fans. Now, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis is remembered not only as a fashion and pop culture icon, but as a woman of remarkable complexity, intellect, and strength, if you can imagine. Now, although she was a naturally introspective and reserved individual, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis lived under constant public scrutiny, even from her earliest days to her final years. And her legacy has been shaped by public tragedy, yet a private resilience, as well as an enduring influence on American culture and history. Jacqueline Bouvier made headlines even before she was born, and her anticipated arrival was noted in newspapers throughout New York. She was born on July 28, 1929, to Janet Lee and John Black Jack Bouvier in New York City. And Jacqueline Bouvier came from a very prominent, well-to-do family, and yet, unfortunately, she was born just months before the historic stock market crash of 1929, which, as you can imagine, deeply affected the family's finances and social status, especially given that Black Jack Bouvier's wealth mostly came from the stock market itself. Now, by 5 years old, Jacqueline Bouvier appeared in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle Society column with her mother. This was the first time that she was photographed in public newspapers, and again, she was only 5 months old. At age 2, she was the sole feature in the East Hampton Star, where they celebrated her second birthday, complete with pony rides. At age 5, she was recognized as one of the most attractive riders at a local horse show. And again, at 8 years old, she was praised for her equestrian grace. She was actually denoted by the East Hampton Star as a little miss, with her lovely curls and well-cut riding habits that the judges and audience simply could not resist. Her lifelong love of horseback riding was already well established by this time, and as you'll see throughout my program, it continued until the last days of her life. Now, the family is a complex one. Jackie's early life was shaped by privilege, but also an instability, especially within her immediate family. John Blackjack Bouvier, who you see here in this picture, was charming, as many men were during the time, but he was especially troubled, and he was known as a gambler, a womanizer, and an alcoholic. In this picture, you see him holding hands with another woman, and that is in fact not Jackie Bouvier's mother, who's the one in the kind of bowler hat that you see. So even right next to her, yet behind her back, he was still engaged with other women. And unfortunately, this womanizer and disloyal tendency and attribute is what would make the family sever. Now, her mother, Janet Lee, as I said, the woman wearing that lovely riding outfit, was from a very high society family. In fact, the Lees, if you've ever heard of them, they were partially responsible for building infrastructure in New York City, specifically Central Park. Now, unfortunately, the two divorced in 1940 when Jacqueline Bouvier was only about 11 years old. And because of their societal ties and being part of that elite circle, This brought public scandal, and the divorce was still very taboo at this time. So you can imagine it brought a lot of unwanted attention on the family, and especially on Jacqueline and her younger sister, Lee. After the divorce, Jackie herself, already a pretty naturally quiet and bookworm, she became even more introspective and guarded, quite frankly, developing a deep desire for privacy that you'll see stays with her throughout her life. And I apologize if you hear sirens behind me. I do work in downtown Canton, and the police department is right behind me. So I do apologize, and I'm happy to repeat anything should my voice get cut out at all. Now, that being said, despite being an introspective and guarded individual, those who knew her closest would still describe her as a witty and deeply intelligent young woman with a keen observation of the world around her. In 1942, Janet Lee remarried following the divorce from Blackjack Bouvier, Hugh D. Auchincloss, a Standard Oil heir with even greater wealth and prestige than the Bouvier family. Now, Jackie and her younger sister Lee gained new step-siblings, and throughout their young adulthood and late adolescence, they spent time between multiple residences, including Marywood, Virginia, as well as Hammersmith Farm in Rhode Island. Despite living among luxury, Jackie and Lee reportedly received only a $50 monthly allowance compared to their step-siblings' more generous funds given the Auchincloss wealth. It was a subtle but formative slight. I do find that it's a bit humorous. Many of you probably never earned an allowance, nor did I. I was always expected to simply do my chores, and I never got paid for them. It was just expected. But that being said, it was a slight because they often felt second then to the Auchincloss children. Now, she was well educated. Jacqueline Bouvier attended Miss Porter's School, which was an elite finishing school for girls that she graduated from in 1947. While there, she participated in the student newspaper. She even boarded her favorite horse, courtesy of her maternal, the Lees. And then she enjoyed also stirring up a bit of mischief. You can see her smoking here. It is during her time at Miss Porter's that she developed the habit of smoking that would also continue for the rest of her life. Now, when she was asked her life ambitions for her senior yearbook quote, she memorably wrote that in general, she had intentions to not be a housewife. And eventually we know that that's a bit ironic because she would become the housewife. In the spring of 1947, Jacqueline Bouvier was officially presented to society, part of a long-standing tradition of debutantes for young women of elite families. That same year, she also was named the Debutante of the Year for 1947, which further catapulted her into the limelight, making her a celebutante. This new title also brought her to New York Times photo spreads, elite cotillions, as well as high-profile luncheons and teas. In December of 1947, she attended the New York Debutantes Cotillion and Christmas Ball and posed for Life magazine alongside fellow debutantes. Now, unfortunately, as historians, we're sad that this is the case. These photos were never actually published, so therefore we don't have that many photos of her with these fellow debs from the New York Times and Life magazine. Now, despite her success and visibility, Jacqueline Bouvier briefly did consider modeling, especially after taking photos for Life magazine, as it earned her her first paycheck. And if you'll recall, she had no intentions of being a housewife, and she liked the idea of making her own money. Now, that being said, despite her parents not getting along, they at least agreed on one thing, and that was the fact that Jacqueline Bouvier would not be a print model. By 1949, she spent most of her weekends immersed in high society, and historians like Carl Anthony noted that she flirted her way into the heart of any beau that she wanted, and with many of her debutante peers rushing to get married, it appears that Jacqueline Bouvier resisted those societal pressures. She enjoyed the social scene, happy to not yet be a bride herself. In her junior year at Vassar College, Jackie studied abroad in France, first in the countryside with a French host family, and later specifically in the Sorbonne in Paris. Most people recognize that Jacqueline Kennedy loved French culture, and a lot of that had to do with the Bouvier family, who claimed ties to French culture and heritage. While she was in France, she completely immersed herself in that culture that she had already loved very much. And she enjoyed a lifelong love of French culture, language, and especially art and fashion. She quickly adapted to the Parisian lifestyle, balancing her studies with social adventures and including a flirtation with American writer John Marquand. If you remind me later, I'll tell you the story about how apparently she lost her virginity to him in a stalled lift in Paris. And according to many sources, Marquand, trying to probably protect her reputation, denied all of these claims. Now, Jackie's return home to the United States was delayed. Although she was expected in June of 1950 for her sister's own debut into American society, she actually returned in mid-September, expected to finish her senior year at George Washington University. That being said, it's interesting that because she's a celebutante, these travels abroad were lightly chronicled in those society pages, which also speculated on her plans, potential suitors, and what she wanted to do with her life after graduating from college. In her senior year at George Washington University, Jackie Bouvier applied for an elite Vogue magazine internship, which involved actually designing a complete issue from front cover to back cover as part of the contest. You can imagine that included designs where she sketched up beautiful dresses, where she placed ads, and even formatted and edited some articles as well. If you can believe it, she spent a ton of time doing this, and she actually won. The prize was very coveted, as it included 6 months in New York, followed by 6 months in Paris. And eager to return to Paris and kind of get away from her family, that is something that she wanted so much. And her family was very proud of her. But her mother, Janet Lee Bouvier Auchincloss, very strategic, warned her daughter that the internship would cause her to miss out on all the good bachelors. And as a result, Jacqueline Bouvier turned down the offer, which we recognize as a pivotal aspect of familial influence over career. As a consolation prize for turning down the Vogue internship, Jackie and her younger sister Lee, you can see here in the center, were gifted a European tour. During their trip, the sisters created a charming and witty scrapbook titled One Special Summer, a blend of drawings and diary-style observations that they wrote and illustrated as a thank you to their parents for sponsoring their trip abroad. It's a really lovely book. You can still sometimes find it on eBay and at auctions. There are probably some newer editions as well, but it was then officially published in 1974 by Lee, offering a rare window into Jackie's humor, her artistic eyes, especially in her 20s. The book is, I cannot understand how lovely it really is. It kind of has that Madeline style with the cursive and the script-looking drawings. And you can see to the far left, that is actually one of her sketches in the scrapbook itself. It's a really lovely book. I've said it a million times at this point. There are some funny anecdotes as well if you get a chance to read it. When she returned home, Jacqueline Bouvier, again, not having aspirations to be a housewife, pivoted to a career in journalism, joining the Washington Times Herald as initially the inquiring cameraman, a role that required her to ask strangers on the street offbeat questions and photograph their responses. It was published 6 days a week, which meant that Jackie Bouvier was out on the street 6 days a week, asking questions from everything to, do you think you're normal? And who is braver in the dentist chair, men or women? And even, what first lady would you like to meet if you could? Again, another almost intuitive question as to who she would become later in life. She completely transformed this role into something uniquely hers, as she did with a lot of things in her life. She actually earned the byline herself in the more fitting title, The Inquiring Camera Girl with Jacqueline Bouvier. In her time as the Inquiring Camera Girl, she averaged 144 interviews per month, which resulted into over 2,600 individuals that she interviewed during her tenure. Now, in her later years, Jacqueline reflected critically on this experience, especially at the times that she interviewed children through schoolyard fences, something that she would come to regret later as a mother herself. It was also during this time that Jacqueline Bouvier was briefly engaged to a gentleman of the name John Husted, but most friends noted that she seemed more enamored with her work than with her fiance. It was also during this time that she met her future husband, Senator John F. Kennedy, who she had initially dismissed as a flirt. Their first formal introduction came in 1951 at a private dinner party hosted by their mutual friends, Charles and Martha Bartlett, who would also later be part of their wedding party. We know that in their early courtship, Jacqueline Bouvier and John F. Kennedy bonded over books as they both loved reading, poetry, and classic literature, and they frequently exchanged recommendations discussing literature. Their intellectual compatibility became a strong foundation for their courtship, which played out under increasing public interest as Kennedy's political star rose. As Jackie Bouvier and Jack Kennedy grew closer, public interest in their relationship, as I said, intensified. Her time as a journalist gave her a clear sense of how media operated, but she was now stepping again into the front of the lens rather than being behind it. As I mentioned, she had been engaged to John Husted. She ended that relationship and then deepened her bond with Kennedy upon actually meeting him and getting to know him. Their courtship did inquire and intrigue Americans. They were both very young, attractive, and charismatic, and soon were regarded as the golden couple. As I mentioned, literature became a love language between them, and they continued to exchange poetry. Their mutual curiosity and appreciation for culture also laid the groundwork for a partnership that would eventually play out on the national stage. On September 12, 1953, Jacqueline Bouvier married Senator John F. Kennedy in a lavish ceremony covered by the press nationwide. Now, although it was a grand affair, it was also a bittersweet affair for Jackie. And depending on what story you read or look into, it honestly depends on which story you read. But unfortunately, her beloved father, Black Jack Bouvier, was unable to escort her down the aisle. Some believe that he was sad that his eldest daughter was getting married, and already a struggling alcoholic, overindulged the night prior and was therefore too intoxicated or just quite frankly sick violently with a hangover to walk her down the aisle. Others believe that actually it was Janet, his ex-wife, who really didn't care for him, that cloyed alcohol and really got him too intoxicated to the point that he couldn't walk her down the aisle. As you can imagine, Jackie was devastated. That being said, her stepfather, Hugh D. Auchincloss, who she was very close with, ultimately walked her down the aisle in her biological father's place. In fact, one of her cousins wrote that she had never seen a bride so beautiful and yet so sad. As I said, the wedding was widely photographed and chronicled, an early preview of the couple's powerful visual presence in American life. And Jackie Kennedy's wedding gown became instantly iconic, though its designer, Ann Lowe, for a very long time remained kind of behind the scenes in that sense. Which brings me actually to the dress a little bit more itself. The centerpiece of the exhibit that we had for Jackie Kennedy in 2023 was a reproduction of the wedding dress that Jackie Kennedy wore at her wedding, which was donated to us from Say Yes to the Dress, Monty Durham. And we love Monty. He's wonderful, and he's an incredibly generous man. When researching the designer, Ann Lowe, our museum's senior curator, Michelle Gullion, discovered a photo of Monty Durham with a historical reproduction of the gown. And when she asked if he would loan it to the museum, he pretty much said, no, I'm just going to gift it to you. And in doing so, he also gifted us his entire Jacqueline Kennedy commemorative collection, which once filled an entire room in his home outside of Washington, D.C. When we first installed the exhibit, Durham and his friend Dan Villa personally dressed the mannequin one last time. I do also want to talk a bit more about Ann Lowe, that kind of lesser known designer at the time, although she's kind of having a bit of a renaissance in her own right. Ann Lowe was the designer of Jacqueline Kennedy's wedding gown and is now finally receiving much recognition and so long deserved. A Black designer and a descendant of enslaved Africans, Lowe became one of the most sought after couturiers for America's elite family. A week before the wedding, there was a tragic flood that actually ruined Ann Lowe's basement studio, destroying Jackie's dress as well as all of the bridesmaid gowns. If you can believe it, within a week, Ann Lowe, with some of her team members, recreated every garment within days without even telling the Kennedy family what had happened. Now, despite her talent, if you can imagine, because she never told the family what happened, Lowe made very little profit on this because she had to make 2 dresses, but only get paid for one. There, we also recognize there was some racial discrimination at the time that often kept her in those basement studios, and her work was often credited to others. Later in life, Anlo struggled with financial and medical hardship, and at one point was practically going blind. She once shared that unpaid bills were mysteriously covered, and she always believed that Jackie Kennedy Onassis had realized what she had done and paid the bills out of gratitude and kindness. I also like that when the flood happened, Ann Lowe is directly quoted in saying that there was no time for tears, and she got right to work recreating the bridal party gowns, as well as the Jackie Kennedy wedding dress itself. Now, following the wedding, as most people know, Jacqueline Kennedy was essential on the campaign trail. She was instrumental in that 1960 presidential campaign, though she participated in a way that matched her thoughtful and deliberate style. She used her celebrity status strategically, often engaging with the press on her own terms while carefully controlling the image that was put forth. Fluent in 5 languages, English, French, Spanish, Italian, and German, Jackie Kennedy even recorded a campaign video completely in Spanish on live television, helping JFK reach diverse voters. Now, unfortunately, her time on the campaign trail was shortened. She had some difficulties with some previous pregnancies, and as a result, her doctors ordered her to limit her travel on the campaign trail. She still used her media savvy as she created the syndicated column titled Campaign Life, which gave readers a glimpse into the life on the campaign trail, as well as offering a distinctly female perspective on the rigors of the politics in American society at the time. On January 20th, 1961, Jackie Kennedy attended her husband's inauguration as the 35th president of the United States, just weeks after giving birth to their son, John Jr., who was often sometimes called by the press, despite him hating it, John John. Washington, D.C. that day was blanketed in snow, and apparently it was pretty chilly, and there was a winter storm the night before. That being said, the skies have said to have cleared, creating a very bright yet frigid day. The Kennedys, both lovers of poetry, as I mentioned, invited Robert Frost to speak at the inauguration. At 86 years old, Frost became the first poet to recite from memory a poem at a presidential inauguration, specifically reciting The Gift outright, which he did from memory after Glare made his prepared remarks unreadable. Jackie, always a cultural patron, helped to shape this president, as poets have simply become part of many modern inaugurations to this day. Jackie Kennedy was also the only First Lady to have a song written specifically for her in honor of the inauguration, which you can see here, the Myers-Davis plays, the inaugural ball of 1961. And in fact, the song, titled Jacqueline by Myers-Davis, was performed alongside traditional selections such as Hail to the Chief. I will say, if you ever get a chance to listen to this record, Myers-Davis allowed his wife and his daughter to sing, and they are not classically trained singers, so it's a bit rough at times on the ears, but the sentiment holds true. Now, we know that a lot of you love Jackie's style, so I can't do a program about Jackie Kennedy Onassis without talking about her style. Her style on Inauguration Day became an instant sensation, which, as most people know, then cemented her even further as a global fashion icon. She wore a buff-colored coat trimmed with sable fur designed by Oleg Cassini that, at the inauguration, stood out against the sea of dark inaugural attire. Her now famous pillbox hat completed the look, and a gust of wind created a dent that Jackie accidentally left in its place, and women across America soon did the exact same thing with their pillbox hats, mimicking her seamlessly effortless grace. Now, specifically at the inaugural ball, she wore this gorgeous white ball gown, which carried a lot of powerful symbolism. The color white has traditionally represented triumph and victory, and other First Ladies, including Michelle Obama and even our current First Lady, Melania Trump, would also wear white for future inauguration events. The gown also featured this lovely French rosette, which Oleg Cassini, who crafted this gown, added as a nod to Jackie's love of France and her paternal ancestry. As I mentioned, Jackie Kennedy entered the White House balancing her role as First Lady, as well as a new mother to their second child, John Jr. And they wanted to, as many First Ladies do, try to raise their children with as normal of a life as possible. That being said, her motherhood journey was shaped by loss and vulnerability. In 1955, Jacqueline Kennedy suffered their first miscarriage, And then in the following year, gave birth to a daughter named Arabella, who was born stillborn. And then in 1963, their infant son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, just died 2 days after his birth due to breathing issues. These losses, coupled with her public visibility, made her especially protective of her surviving children. And her experience as a formal journalist who once interviewed children led to a deep personal regret, as well as a strong resolve to shield her own children from public and media exposure. In fact, when photographer Ellen Key Blunt took a picture of Caroline Kennedy at school, but chose not to publish it, it was Jackie who wrote her a very heartfelt thank you letter. Dear Miss Blunt, I want to tell you how much I appreciate your asking about using the picture of Carolyn in the costume class, and then not using it when I said I hoped you wouldn't. That is just an incredibly decent gesture. Please tell your editor what a fine person you are. I think it is wonderful that the Post operates that way. Having just had a rather shattering experience with someone who promised they wouldn't use pictures of my daughter at another little show, and I believed her and stayed at the show, and they all appeared, I am doubly appreciative. I know that newspapers need to print different, or rather unusual, pictures. Fine, there is always the conflict of trying to raise one's children fairly normally. So when you, who are torn both ways, respect a little girl's chance to have a happy day with other children, who fortunately just treat her as another 4-year-old, that is almost the only public place where she isn't singled out and fawned over, it is amazing and consoling. I think you made the right decision, the humane one. But what you did is rare, and I do want you to know how impressed and deeply grateful her father and I are. Sincerely, Jacqueline Kennedy. Jacqueline Kennedy treated her fashion as a form of cultural diplomacy, an extension of her role as the First Lady of the United States. And she referred to her formal wear as her state clothes, often working closely with designers like Oleg Cassini to reflect her elegant yet modern sensibility. Her gowns were carefully tailored, not just for style, but for symbolic meaning as well, often incorporating colors or motifs tied to the visiting dignitary home countries during diplomatic dinners and state dinners at the White House. Jackie's clothes emphasized her posture, poise, and her intentions as a diplomat. Her understated elegance communicated respect, strength, and refinement, qualities that helped shape the global image of the Kennedy administration, both internationally and nationally. Now, perhaps one of Jackie's most enduring legacies as First Lady is her transformation of the White House from a residence into a living museum of American history. In 1941, she visited the White House as a young woman, and it left her dismayed, especially the mismatched furniture and the lack of historical context, as well as a guide to help get you through the house and understand why things were the way that they are. In a 1961 interview with Life magazine, Mrs. Kennedy famously declared, "Everything in the White House must have a reason for being there. It would be sacrilege merely to redecorate it. It must be restored. And that has nothing to do with decoration. That is a question of scholarship." Within her first month in the White House, Jackie formed the White House Fine Arts Committee and launched the White House Historical Association, which still exists to this day. To avoid public criticism over spending taxpayer money, she funded the project through sales of an official guidebook, The White House, a historic guide, which sold over 500,000 copies in 10 months. In February of 1962, she then led a live televised tour of the newly restored White House, which drew at least 56 million viewers, earning her an honorary TV Emmy. The event not only captivated the nation, but then further elevated her role as a First Lady who was also a public historian and a cultural steward. She also extended her preservation mission to international cultural exchange. While dancing with French Minister of Culture André Malraux, she expressed a wish to share the Mona Lisa with the American people. If you can believe it, Malraux agreed, leading to an unprecedented loan of Leonardo da Vinci's iconic painting and one of the most recognizable paintings in world history. The Mona Lisa opened first at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. in January of 1963, before moving to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Over 1.5 million Americans had the opportunity and privilege to view the masterpiece, an unparalleled moment in U.S. and France cultural relations, as well as a testament to Mrs. Kennedy's influence. Whether it was preserving the White House as a living museum or orchestrating international cultural milestones, Jackie Kennedy's vision fused history, diplomacy, as well as aesthetic beauty, and redefined what first ladies could do on the world stage. As I said, Jacqueline Kennedy was a diplomat at heart, and she enjoyed sharing culture. She believed that if you tie diplomacy to history, you can imagine the very setting of state functions. On July 11, 1962, the Kennedys hosted a state dinner at George Washington's historic Mount Vernon, and it was the only time in American history that a state dinner took place outside of the White House, and specifically at Mount Vernon. And you can probably understand why. It was a logistical nightmare. The dinner honored President Ayub Khan of Pakistan, with guests boarding boats from the White House to travel all the way down the Potomac River. Arriving at Mount Vernon, they were welcomed with hors d'oeuvres, candlelight, and Tiffany-decorated tents on the mansion lawn. As I said, this was a logistical nightmare. Before becoming a historian, I was a chef, and this actually does sound like my worst nightmare. At this time, Mount Vernon had no electricity, indoor plumbing, or refrigeration on site. Grounds were sprayed 3 times to reduce mosquitoes because it's July in the DC area, and it's incredibly humid near the water. And food was prepped off-site and then boated down the river, which meant that Secret Service agents had to taste test every dish to make sure no one was getting poisoned or sick. Now, despite these challenges, the evening was a dazzling success. It was an elegant blend of diplomacy, hospitality, as well as a reverence for history, specifically our national history. These are the things that we talk about when we say Camelot. Now, unfortunately, that will all come to a halting, screeching stop. Jacqueline Kennedy's world was shattered when she arrived in Dallas, Texas for her first public appearance following the death of their 5th child, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, who had died just earlier that year. Still deeply in mourning, Jackie was hesitant to be in the public eye after losing Patrick, who died sitting in John F. Kennedy's lap. Now, she knew that Texas was a key state in the upcoming re-election campaign, and despite being in mourning, she chose to stand by her husband's side despite her personal grief. And I do want to, again, underscore that this was her first public appearance since the death of that child, and you can imagine she was already carrying immense emotional weight. I don't often have much to say here. If you were alive when Kennedy was assassinated, you remember exactly where you were and how that felt. So I usually just like to say a quote from Jackie Kennedy herself. Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot. There will be great presidents again. There will never be another Camelot again. The Kennedy staff, it took until 1965 to respond to every single condolence letter that was sent to Jackie following the assassination in 1963. So it took almost over 2 years to respond to all that correspondence. And you can see in the top right, that picture actually continues on. That table was full of boxes and went on for multiple tables. Though no longer First Lady, Jackie Kennedy's life was far from private following the assassination. Tour buses regularly drove past her Georgetown residence, encouraging visitors to try to catch a glimpse of the First Lady or her children. And sometimes the less savory ones even encouraged visitors to try taking pictures of her, even doing private things like getting into her bathroom or her shower. Even after relocating to New York City, Jacqueline Kennedy was relentlessly pursued by paparazzi, struggling to maintain her privacy amid intense public fascination. Despite stepping away from the White House, Jackie Kennedy remained a constant fixture in the public eye. Every man seen with her sparked rumors of lovers or engagements, ranging from plausible to outright tabloid fabrications that you can see here on this slide. She had previously met Aristotle Onassis when her and JFK were still married, but he soon became a safe haven for protection and privacy. Her 1968 marriage to him shocked many Americans who felt that Aristotle Onassis was simply not worthy of Jackie Kennedy. And you can see here that she faced a lot of paparazzi. You have to give credit to TV Picture Life and Photo Screen for their ability to splice together photos in an era without Photoshop as she was pictured next to Sonny Bono as well as Ted Kennedy. And both of those are actually fake tabloid altered photos. Now, as I said, Aristotle Onassis was kind of a safe haven for Jacqueline Kennedy. He was the wealthiest man alive at the time of their marriage. And when they got married, he was able to provide Jackie with secluded yachts and private islands, offering her a retreat from the relentless media scrutiny. Despite this marriage, she still faced aggressive paparazzi, including Ron Galella, whose intrusive behavior, specifically snapping nude photos of her while on Onassis's yacht, led her to file multiple lawsuits to maintain physical distance, specifically from her children as well as from herself. Jackie Onassis's marriage to Aristotle Onassis was for the most part very happy, but eventually was also challenged by tragedy. In 1973, Onassis's son Alexander died in a tragic plane crash, and he blamed his wife Jackie for her Kennedy bad luck, also calling it her Kennedy curse. Onassis himself died on March 15, 1975, from complications of myasthenia gravis. And as a result, Jackie Onassis inherited a significant estate that thereafter sought her a more privileged and quieter life, in which she eventually would develop a long-term companionship with Maurice Templesman, a trusted family friend and financial advisor. By 1988, Maurice Templesman moved into Jackie's Fifth Avenue apartment, where they lived together until her death in 1994. Now, going back a bit, in 1975, Jackie Onassis still had those preservationist, restoration passions, and she led efforts to save Grand Central Station Terminal from demolition and replacement by a modern skyscraper. The landmark's protection had been overturned by courts, threatening the historic terminal's future, and it was Jackie who mobilized public support, testified in hearings, and worked with preservationists nationwide. Though the terminal was saved legally, restoration only began in earnest by the 1990s. When Grand Central Station reopened in 1998, it featured restored marble concourses, clean celestial ceilings, which you can see here, as well as chandeliers, reaffirming its status as an architectural treasure. The terminal's Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis foyer commemorates her pivotal role in saving this iconic New York City landmark. I do a video of that as well.
Completed in 1913, it's probably one of the best-known buildings in the country, Grand Central Station. And now the Penn Central Railroad, which owns Grand Central, is talking about building a 59-story office tower above the terminal. The Grand Central complex, including 8 hotels, would take about $850 million to build today. Like many train stations in this country, Grand Central is a monument. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings with paintings, stone walls. A group calling itself the Committee to Save Grand Central Station is trying to stop any alteration of the building. One of those on the committee, Mrs. Jacqueline Onassis.
I think if we don't care about our past, we can't have very much hope for our future. And we've all heard that it's too late, or that it has to happen, or that it's inevitable. But I don't think that's true. Because I think if there is a great effort, even if it's at the 11th hour, you can succeed. And I think, and I know that that's what we'll do. Thank you.
What is happening here is not peculiar to New York City alone, for in dozens of cities around the country, buildings, old, beautiful, and historic parts of the community are also endangered. This is David Klein, New York City.
After settling the Onassis estate, as I said, Jackie Onassis was afforded a very privileged life where she could do pretty much whatever she wanted. And as a young woman, she loved books very, very much. And she then returned to work, finally, as one of her favorite jobs, a book editor, first for Viking Press and then later for Doubleday as well. From 1975 until her death in 1994, she helped edit over 100 books, fostering literature on art, history, dance, and children's story. She insisted on actually promoting the author in the book, not herself, and only 2 books carry her name as editor, The Firebird, and as you can see here, In the Russian Style. What's really unique about Jacqueline Onassis is that she championed diverse voices and narratives, often playing a vital role in bringing important cultural works to publication. You can see here that she helped edit Moonwalk by Michael Jackson, as well as Sally Hemings by Barbara Chase Rabeau. Now, most people know that Sally Hemings today, we recognize that She was the enslaved mistress of President Thomas Jefferson. And for a long time, people wondered if they had children and descendants. And Barbara Chase Rabode told Jacqueline Onassis, while sitting on Onassis's island of Scorpius, that she had done the research. And she believed that Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson had had children together. In fact, she claimed that there was at least 6 biological children. When they attempted to publish the book, Jeffersonian historians said that the Sally Hemings narrative had always been campaign slander and something to detract from Thomas Jefferson as a founding father. Well, in the early 2000s, it turned out that DNA testing proved that Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings had at least 6 living descendants, and they believe it technically could have been anywhere from 8 to 10 that unfortunately did not all survive childhood. Barbara Chase Rabode always said that it was a really victorious moment, but unfortunately at that point, Jacqueline Onassis had already died, and she wished she could have shared that with her. In 1993, while horseback riding, which, as I said, was an enduring passion throughout her life, Jacqueline Onassis suffered a fall resulting in a concussion, which was very normal. But during her medical exams, doctors noted swollen groin nodes that led to an official diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. During that time, she underwent chemotherapy, wearing a wig during treatment, and she continued to work part-time as an editor dedicated to her authors. Unfortunately, the cancer would spread to her brain and metastasize, and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis died on May 19, 1994. When she passed, her son, John Jr., came out to the press and said that she died surrounded by her friends and her family and her books, and the people and the things that she loved, and that she did it in her own way, on her own terms, and we all feel lucky for that. And now she's in God's hands. Jackie Kennedy Onassis' life transcended tragedy and fame, reflecting a woman who defined her own path. She remained a cultural and literary advocate, an icon of elegance, and a fierce protector of history as well as privacy. From her pillbox hats to her historic preservation efforts, her influence endures. In fact, her story resonates because of its sheer humanity. I'm sure we can all pick a moment of her life where we really connect and feel what she probably felt. She was a complex woman who faced joy, loss, as well as public scrutiny with grace. So I thank you all for joining me today. I am happy to take questions in the chat. It looks like I've already got a few things in the chat.
Yes, we do have some comments and questions for you, Stephanie. Annette notes that this is the first time she's heard of the First Lady's Library and Museum and finds that interesting. She recalls seeing Jackie's wedding dress at the Smithsonian, and she wants to bring her national parks passport to be stamped. So
Good, please
you'll
do.
have a
Please do come out.
visitor. And Sherry notes that she remembers the tragedy of November 22nd very well. I think many of us remember that very sad day and where we were. I know I was a second grader when I heard in my classroom. Let's see. We have a question from Evelyn. She is interested in learning more about J.G. Husted Jr., Jackie's first fiance. Perhaps you could illuminate that a bit.
Absolutely. John Husted was another society gentleman, very well off, well-to-do, and he actually lived in New York City. At the time when Jackie was engaged to him, she was still living in D.C., working for the Washington Times-Herald, and she actually found out that she was losing her job because she was getting married from that same newspaper that she was working. They announced her engagement, and later on the expanded article it said, and we're so sad that Jacqueline Bouvier is leaving our staff. And you can imagine, as someone who liked earning her own money, she was really disappointed in that. That being said, Black Jack Bouvier really did like that John Husted was based out of New York City because he was still living in New York City at the time. And when she took a train from DC to New York, she would stop by and see her dad. And at one point, John Husted felt that she was kind of leaving him in the dust for her job and for her father, who did require extensive visits. So we don't have a ton of personal information other than that. But as someone said in the chat, once you look him up, it's amazing how much those sources expand for you. Thank you. That's a wonderful question.
And we also have another question from Bruins fan to everyone. Did Jackie get along with Aristotle Onassis' children?
Unfortunately, not particularly, especially his daughter. She seemed to have had a pleasant enough relationship with the son that passed away in that tragic plane accident. But according to some sources, when she was settling her estate with the Onassis family, her new daughter-in-law did not want her to get as much as she did. She didn't believe that she actually loved Onassis, her father, and she believed that she was just money hungry. But we know Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis had her own privilege, although it was an unprecedented wealth that she received through the Onassis estate. But we do know that unfortunately, they did not get along much at all. And I do believe Onassis's first wife is still alive, and she did not care for Jacqueline Kennedy either.
We have a lot of interesting comments here from folks. I have a question. If knowing what you know about Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis and the difficult times that she lived through, both personal and, as a citizen of this country, what advice might she have for us about living our best lives now?
Well, we have several quotes from Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis that I think could inspire many. I love the one where she says, "Above all things, I am woman. I am a woman." And I love that she just embodied that fully. She also once commented that, as some of you may have heard in the video, that if we don't care about our past, we very well can't plan for our future. And I think that is very relevant, specifically as a historian by trade, as well as when we talk about, as we're coming up to America 250, we're celebrating American past, and we have to talk about the past, or we can't simply plan for the future. So I think her advice would be learn from the past, and kind of do things your own way. Remember that ambition where she said, "I don't want to be a housewife." She really did things in her own style, even within those social constructs in which she operated. And I think she would say, just do what you want in your own style, and don't forget to remember the past. I did see someone also directly message me, so if that's okay, Gypsy, I'd like to address that one as well. Someone asked if I could talk a little bit more about the scandalous virginity incident that I mentioned early on. There is this fascination with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis' sexuality in literature, in media, some of those tabloids. That's only a small sampling of tabloids we have in our collection that talk about nude photos and her body and who she's sleeping with and who she could be sleeping with. And they wanted her to marry Ted Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. But the one that I think is really interesting, and you can read more about this story in Carl Anthony's Camera Girl, which just came out, I believe, in 2023. It's a fairly newer one, and it actually looks at her earlier life leading up to when she becomes First Lady. So it's a lot of that childhood, Washington Times Herald work. But according to most people, and according to actually a distant cousin of the Bouvier family, they said that she was in Paris, where she was kind of casually courting American writer John Marquand. And apparently they stopped the lift and indulged in each other's desires. And later, when he was pressed about it, John Marquand said it never happened. That was just a rumor. It never happened. If we ever got stuck in a stalled lift, it was simply because of the fact that the elevator wasn't working. But the cousin said they did, and he was just doing that really to preserve her reputation. If you can imagine, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, it's still pretty scandalous to lose your virginity before actually being married. And Carl Anthony argued again that she kind of flirted her way throughout Paris. So we kind of just leave that as it is. And that's really all I know at this point. But I do recommend Camera Girl. I do recommend, if you like children's books, or you have grandnieces, nieces and nephews in general, that Ronnie Diamondstein's Jackie and the Books She Loved, as well as Jackie and the Mona Lisa, are really, really fun books for everyone, but especially children. The illustrations are gorgeous. So thank you for asking that. I appreciate it.
We have another good question from Kathy. Did Jackie continue to participate in White House events, and did she participate in politics?
Excellent question. Not as much as you would think. We know that the Johnson administration, specifically Lady Bird Johnson, later invited Jackie and her children to the White House, and it was a very private affair, which is why you probably don't hear about it, to let her kind of come into the house one last time and visit and let her children kind of reminisce on where they had started to grow up in their childhood. And it was a very personal, beautiful gesture of a fellow First Lady who was there in Dallas that day as well. But that being said, she didn't participate in too many White House events, nor did she really participate actively in politics. Most of her activism came for preservation, restoration, Grand Central Station, and book editing. That being said, I was just going somewhere with this and I apologize. That being said, we do have some records that at one point she did meet Nancy Reagan. That's what I was going to say, another fellow First Lady, and we have a picture of them greeting each other very warmly. So I'm not sure how many things she actually attended publicly, but we know that she did maintain some really civil relationships with fellow First Ladies after her own term. Excellent question.
We have a lot of folks thanking you so much, and Janice is asking if there's a website for the First Ladies Library and Museum that you can provide to us.
I absolutely can. I'm going to type it in the chat right now. It is www.firstladies.org. There we have all of our biographies of First Ladies. We've got shortened biographies just for you to learn more about our wonderful and incredible First Ladies throughout American history. We also publish our events. We do a number of virtual programs like this on a regular occurrence where we book speakers who are experts in First Ladydom. Our June Legacy Lecture, as we call them, is actually a First Ladies comedian based out of LA. And she'll be talking about, in a light way, you know, when we talk about assassination, you remember Kennedy and you remember Lincoln, but you don't remember McKinley or Garfield. And so she's going to be kind of talking about how we use humor when we're far enough removed from history to share history, because once you laugh about it, it kind of humanizes our First Lady. So it'll be a very interesting program. I hope that you'll be able to join us, which brings me to my next point. We do have memberships that, depending on what level you join, all of our virtual programs become free for you. So I do hope that if you ever get a chance, it's on our website, do join as a member today of the National First Ladies Library and Museum.
And we have, thank you so much, Stephanie. And we have a recommendation from one of our participants. Sherry recommends a wonderful book by Jackie's daughter, The Best Loved Poems of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis by Caroline Kennedy.
It's a beautiful book. It is so beautiful. One of her favorites was a poem about the sea. That's an excellent recommendation. Love that book as well. And it is referenced in that children's book, Jackie and the Books That She Loved. So there's a lot of threads of research that kind of come together, and the loved poems is really a lovely one.
And Deb is asking about some of the First Ladies who seem to be more withdrawn. Were there any other First Ladies that you can mention who didn't participate much as First Ladies? Certainly not as much as Jacqueline Kennedy.
Absolutely. And that's the thing about First Ladydom. It is a spectrum. It is not a paid position. It is a volunteer role, and there is no job description when you become First Lady. So what you choose to make of the role is entirely of your own volition. There were several First Ladies who were not historically very involved. The first couple ones that come to mind include Jane Pierce from the antebellum era, and she actually believed that her husband being elected president was a curse because their son had just died in a tragic train accident, and she completely withdrew and was in mourning for the majority of her term. She engaged in a lot of those Victorian seances, trying to make contact with her dead son, but she was very withdrawn as a First Lady. A lot of our earlier First Ladies, too, you don't typically hear about if they're not actively covered in press and media, which was not as readily accessible as it is now. So it honestly depends, but the first one that comes to mind is Mrs. Jane Pierce, and you all have to feel a bit bad for her, unfortunately. Eliza Johnson, following the Civil War, was also pretty withdrawn. You can imagine her husband's impeachment definitely made things a bit rocky for her as First Lady. Elizabeth Monroe was also, although with her French kind of Jackie Kennedy stylistic choices, although she was very stylistic, she was also not particularly out there. The role of First Lady has evolved over the last 250 years. For a long time, it was expected that they simply host dinners and special events. And then as the First Lady role evolves, many have taken on personal causes. Sometimes they join the campaign trail, and sometimes they continue their work even after being First Lady, such as Lady Bird Johnson, Jackie Kennedy. Laura Bush still remained very involved in literacy efforts. So it's definitely worth looking into a bit more. But there are First Ladies that were not always historically as visible as someone like Jackie Kennedy. Great question.
Well, we are hearing so many folks thanking you very much for your presentation, Stephanie. Just wonderful to understand the incredible life of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And we really appreciate everyone joining us today. We will have more programming with NKA Idaho, New Knowledge Adventures, and I've placed a link to register for all future summer and fall classes into 2025. And we, again, so much appreciate you, Stephanie, so fascinating. And and folks are saying, please have Stephanie back. Donna says, please have Stephanie back to do another presentation. So we'll try to work on that.
I guess we're just going to have to stay in touch. I look forward to the opportunity of presenting for AARP again. And I know many of you are joining us via Zoom from all over the United States. So thank you so much for joining me. And if you do ever stop by the First Ladies Museum, let them know. And if I'm here on site, I'm happy to come down and just say hi. So thank you very much, AARP, Gypsy, Lisa, Sheena, Janice, thank you all very much. It was such a pleasure.
And thank all of you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.